This episode introduced the Tleilaxu Face Dancers as well as pretty much confirmed that Desmond is a goola and gave us the most references we ever got to the eyes of Arafel, which can only mean
God is watching us, judging us.
So let's break it all down to understand what it all means. I want to start off with the fact that Sister Theodosia was revealed to us to be a Tleilaxu face dancer. But what exactly is a face dancer? Face dancers are a race of metamorphic transhumans created by the Beni Tleilax, aka the Tleilaxu. We talked about the Beni Tleilax in a previous video I did on the channel explaining why Desmond Hart may be a goola, and with Theodosia being revealed as a face dancer and the things we learn about Desmond this episode, it all but confirms the fact that he is a goola, but we're gonna get into that a little later in the video. Back to the face dancers. Face dancers are created by the Tleilaxu in almost the same way that the goolas are, in something called an axolotl tank. These axolotl tanks allow the Beni Tleilax to reproduce living human beings. And rumor has it, since no one has seen a Tleilaxu female in thousands of years, the Tleilaxu may have turned their women into these axolotl tanks, which is how they're able to produce living human beings such as goolas and face dancers. What makes face dancers different though is the way they're genetically engineered. They're created with more muscle tissue and more nerve linkage than the average human being, giving face dancers the ability to mimic anyone perfectly. And from creation, they're trained in Prana Bindu, which is also the same kind of training that the Bene Gesserit go through. It's a training that gives you absolute control over nerves and muscles. We see the Bene Gesserit use this in almost every episode when they're truth saying. Because of this training, but more specifically because of their genetic engineering, they're able to manipulate their muscles, their nerves, their bones, and reconfigure their body and flesh to resemble almost anybody. Along with the training that they receive, they're able to mimic almost anyone, making them the perfect infiltrators throughout the universe. But because they're genetically altered beings, they could mimic anyone despite their age, build, height, or sex. It means that the face dancers themselves are hermaphrodites, which is crazy because that's another name for face dancers in the Dune universe. They're also known as the Jadasha hermaphrodites. What makes it even more interesting is that Reverend Mother Superior Valia knows that Theodosia is a face dancer, which makes sense because Reverend Mothers are masters at Prana Bindu, and because they can truth say and detect physical incongruities in people, that allows them to know a lot of things about certain people, just like they know a lot of you haven't clicked the subscribe button yet, because Valia is always watching. Which makes sense that Valia knew. They even hinted as much back in episode 1 when Tula and Valia were talking about how uniquely useful Theodosia could be, because they took her in when she had nowhere else to go, showing that she knew since the beginning. It's pretty easy for them to detect a face dancer. The interesting part is the fact that they let Theodosia into the sisterhood in the first place, which essentially is going to allow her to become a Bene Gesserit. But being a face dancer, Theodosia is not really a female, which means that the Bene Gesserit only have issues with males joining the sisterhood or getting these abilities, and it shows that they have no problems with face dancers joining their order, or any other race of beings so long as the sex isn't male. But that brings us to what exactly is Theodosia's role in this story. While it looks like she's extremely loyal to Valia, face dancers are often used by the Tleilaxu as spies and assassins. So could Theodosia be a spy inside the sisterhood working for the Tleilaxu? I mean, it would make sense, especially if Desmond, who I think is a Tleilaxu goola, is also working for the Tleilaxu as well. It would make sense that they're trying to undermine the sisterhood from a two-pronged attack approach, the same way that the sisterhood was trying to undermine the Imperium by supporting the Emperor while also supporting the rebellion. That brings us to Desmond, who I've been saying is a goola. Goolas, who are clones of deceased individuals, oftentimes only have the death memories of that individual, meaning that the memories of that individual they have are only of the moments right before the death of that individual. And we see that with Desmond this episode. When he's using his powers, he has a flashback to the moment where the Shai-Hulud attacks him. And inside the mouth of the great worm, we see the darkness, and then we see the eyes of Arafel. And that's the only memory or backstory we have of Desmond. Even when Valia interrogated him and he talked about his home planet, he didn't give any details about it, just the name of it. And we know from that name, that planet was a planet that was ravaged by the Tleilaxu, and the people there were taken as slaves to be experimented on, which would explain how they were able to create a goola of Desmond in the first place. The Bene Tleilax's main objective throughout all of the Dune story is to convert the entire universe into their religion. And their religion really stands opposed to the using of thinking machines, as they deem human evolution to come from genetic engineering, and not necessarily from the thinking machines, which makes Desmond's assault on thinking machines and thinking machine sympathizers that much more poignant. At the end of the last episode, we found out that the Sisterhood was using thinking machines in their genetic archiving, and in this episode we see that Valia really is not afraid to use thinking machines, as she has the rebels buy a thinking machine from the Ixians. And we talked about the Ixians in a previous video, but I want to mention them again. I want to mention that I really enjoyed the fact that this episode showed us that the Ixians were using thinking machines and are still using thinking machines, which explains why their technology is always more advanced than everybody else. We even see a prototype of the Hunter Seeker that we saw in Dune. It's funny that the prototype is actually more advanced than the one we saw in Dune, because the one in Dune Prophecy is a thinking machine. It has AI controlling it. So when Desmond exposes the sympathizers, destroys the thinking machine, it all but confirms him that the Sisterhood needs to be purged, because not only are they manipulating the Imperium, they're also using thinking machines to do so, which is exactly why the Tleilaxu stand in staunch opposition to the Sisterhood. And while both ideologies want human advancement, their methodologies clash drastically. But we're also starting to see the limits of the prototype Gola that Desmond is, because using his powers takes a physical toll on him, and the more targets he has, the more power he uses, the more that toll is exacerbated, which may prove to be his undoing, because now the Sisterhood has his blood and his DNA, and Valia is going to run it through her genetic archives to find out exactly who Desmond is and how his body works. And the only reason Valia can do this is because the Bene Gesserit has their own thinking machine, the AI Arael. Valia and her sister aren't just using this AI for genetic archiving. We see Valia is going to use it to her own end to trace Desmond's bloodline. We also see that Tula has used it for her own selfish gains to bring Tleila back to life. And Arael, being an AI, was able to administer enough spice to bring Tleila back from her other memory. Their usage and abuse of the thinking machines is exactly what's driving the Sisterhood to the reckoning. This episode had the most references to the eyes of Arafel that we've had this entire season, where all the acolytes of the Sisterhood went into hysteria and all drew the exact same thing, the eyes of Arafel. We even saw the eyes of Arafel while Desmond was using his powers at the Great Council to punish the machine sympathizers. Arafel being a dark cloud of holy judgment that's supposed to bring on the end of the human race. At the center of this dark cloud, all we see are machine eyes and we hear the sounds of machines, giving us a forewarning that the machines will lead to the end of mankind. But like I've said before, I like to keep these videos spoiler free for the non-book readers. But this week I am going to drop a video about Arafel, explaining exactly what it is and how it pertains to the entire Dune Prophecy. But what we need to know in the concept of Dune Prophecy is that Arafel is a dark cloud that's supposed to bring on the end of humanity. And the Ixians, the ones we saw this episode, who lean heavily into thinking machines, are pushing the very thinking machines that's supposed to bring out the end of humanity. With Tleila now being awake, it brings up a whole new dynamic now. She has the other memories of Dorothea, and we see Emlyn and some of the acolytes of the Sisterhood turning away from Valia's teachings and going back to the Orange Bible. It's not lost on me that the main proponent of the Orange Bible in the Sisterhood used to be Dorothea, who was the one that held Tleila in the other memory, feeding her all the information that she needed to know about Valia as well as Tula. And the dream that all the acolytes were having throughout this episode of slitting their throats in a similar fashion to the way Valia made Dorothea slit her throat is going to play a big factor in destabilizing Valia's control of the Sisterhood. Something that I noticed that was very interesting is with the acolytes as well as with Desmond, whenever they're having their dreams about Arafel or their visions, even when it came to Mother Rakella, it's always within the desert of Arrakis, and the giant sandworm plays a key role in it. And now that Tleila survived, she's also a Reverend Mother who has the memories of not only Dorothea, but the memories of the very first Reverend Mother, Rakella, Berto, and Arael, making her the most likely candidate to be the leader of the Bene Gesserit. The fact that she was induced with spice to the point that her eyes are blue, similar to Paul, his mother Jessica, and Paul's unborn sister, shows that she has a deeper connection to her genetic memory than Valia does. And now that Valia has assigned herself to the Truthsayer of House Harkonnen, she kind of now has to adhere to her duties as Truthsayer, which would give Rakella's line via Tleila control of the Sisterhood once again. And Tleila makes the perfect Reverend Mother for the Sisterhood. Not only does she have Rakella's memories and Rakella's goals in mind, she also has Dorothea's sensibilities, so it forms a more perfect balance as opposed to Valia, who this episode all but admitted that had her family embraced her ideals, she would have forsaken the Sisterhood for House Harkonnen. So her loyalties never lied with the Sisterhood, it always lied with her family and elevating her name. She only became Mother Superior, not because of the ideals of the Sisterhood, but because it would elevate her, Valia Harkonnen. But guys, that's just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, peace.